What is going on, Sports Wars? We're here and we are live. A special day for Against the Spread. A little mix up in the schedule because I have some stuff going on tomorrow night, but Robert kindly was able to adjust his busy schedule to make sure we fit the show in. We didn't want to delay it, so we figured might as well do it now. It's the day we both had. So here we are on a Tuesday, right after a doubleheader for Monday Night Football, in which the Browns saw maybe their entire season go down in flames when they saw that replay for Nick Chubb. But Robert, how are you doing on this Tuesday?
Good. The our free pick last week, the Florida Gators cashed early. Unfortunately for us Vol fans, but you kind of see that coming. The Florida's a little bit underrated, I think, this year. So that was good. And and if you want to get good picks, our picks for the rest of the football season will be basically less than a quarter a pick at sportspicks.locals.com. We won every 5% play all of last year on every big sporting event: college football, college basketball, pro basketball, the Champions League in soccer, the World Cup final in soccer. We had big plays on all of them: Super Bowl, title games, you name it, and won them all. Won our first 5% play of the year this year in the NFL. So that's at sportspicks.locals.com. You can also get master classes on sports betting. You get live chats. You get live Q&As every Friday. Every Friday, you get live Q&A. All weekend, you get live chats. You can ask questions and response. You get free information if you want to just be a board member. But if you want to subscribe, you get even more high-quality information. The best value, sportspicks.locals.com, where we put the odds in your favor.
There you go. That is quite the elevator pitch right there. And it's true. If you guys listen to some of those things, whether it was that Florida State Boston College, like Robert called that as well. So it's obviously not every bet's going to, not everything's going to turn out the right way. But if most of them do, then you're on the right track. I see NL in the chat say, season, what about his bank account? Running backs never going to get paid big again in the NFL. It's so funny. I've seen a lot of different arguments surrounding the Nick Chubb thing. Some from players saying, this is why the running backs, they need to get paid more. They need more guaranteed money because of things like this. And then on the opposite side, I'm seeing a lot of people say, well, you realize this is why owners don't pay running backs, right? It is this double-edged sword, and both people are trying to make the point, but it's viewed differently by different sides. If you're running a football organization, it's tough to pony up that much money for a spot that gets often injured, tend to fall off fairly quickly into that second contract, and also is not easy to replace, but in terms of production, you can find ways to make do without at the running back position.
No doubt. We saw it with Zeke. He was at the top of his game until he wasn't. Saw it with Adrian Peterson. He was on top of his game until he wasn't. And those were some of the great elite backs. There's not that many Barry Sanders that come along very often. So you end up with backs that the average shelf life is 3 to 4 years of being highly productive, 5 to 6 years of being solidly productive if they're one of the best backs to play in the game in the modern era. And it just doesn't make sense to pay them tons of money because they take too many hits. And it's unfortunate. Chubb was, in my view, the best back in the league.
Yeah.
Was carrying the Browns. You look at what you pay for people like Deshaun Watson, who hasn't come close to earning his paycheck in Cleveland. Now he's going to get the chance. Chubb is out. They're 1-1. If he's the real deal, that's worth that, $250 million he was guaranteed. It's time for him to show it. Otherwise, it was a waste of cash put on Deshaun. It'll be interesting to see him. I feel bad for Chubb. He was a lot of fun to watch. He was a fantastic talent. It's hard to see him coming back from that kind of injury. But, we live in a time period when Aaron Rodgers says he's going to come back from an Achilles if somehow the Jets miraculously make it to the playoffs. So who knows?
Yeah, and this is the same leg that he had actually a very similar injury to, but it was all the way back in 2015. So it's the second time that knee would be reconstructed from that standpoint. Obviously, I wouldn't bet against a guy like Nick Chubb with the work that he puts in. I wouldn't question. He's done it before, and he's going to be motivated. But it's tough to see him. Just an awful situation. Obviously, a lot of people trying to get on Minkah Fitzpatrick for it. I don't think it was dirty. He was trying to take Chubb out at the legs, and he just happened to be interacting with another player on top, kind of as Minkah was diving. I don't think he was trying to hurt him at all. But we're at an NFL where you can't hit him high. what are you supposed to do? And hit them low is what the NFL's taught these guys to do. And you're going to see more injuries like this when that happens. But,
Yep.
but I was just going to say, let's get into some of the. We're not 2 games in the NFL season, and officially that is enough time to start to panic, right? To start either to panic or to say, "Oh, our team's legit." So we've got 8 or 9 2-loss teams. We got 8 or 9 2-win teams. And really, it starts to be in time where you're panicking because 0-2 teams do not have a good record of making the playoffs. So of all these 0-2 teams we have right now, Robert, like who are you looking at that they have the best chance to make the playoffs despite their poor start? Let me list them off real quick.
Yeah, I mean,
teams, the Patriots, the Vikings, the Chargers, the Panthers, the Texans, the Bengals, the Cardinals, the Bears, and the Broncos.
I mean, chances are historically only one of those teams is going to make the playoffs. Only 11% chance of making the playoffs if you start the season winless. I think, I would have normally preseason might have put the Broncos in that category, but they managed to lose their 2 games at home. It's hard to put them there. I mean, I'm a Sean Payton fan. I hope he resurrects Russell Wilson's career, but it's hard to see them making the playoffs when you start winless at home. The Chargers, a lot of people's favorite team to make a run, but you're in the compact. Now, granted, you get the Dolphins in a close game, you lose an OT at Tennessee. Now you play a tough game at the Vikings, another one of those teams that started off winless. Now, of those teams, that's the most unlucky to be 0-2 is the Minnesota Vikings. They really outplayed the Eagles last week. They badly outplayed the Bucs. They managed to lose both games. And they're going to have a chance to get off the schneid because they face the Chargers this week at home. So maybe they can get it in. But of all those teams, there's one that's done it before. In fact, they did it last year. And that would be my team to likely make the playoffs, even though they start off 0-2. It's the Bengals. There's something about Joe Burrow. I don't know if he just parties all summer or what. But, they start off bad, and then they get rolling about midseason, and then they start peaking at playoff time. I wouldn't want to bet against Joe Burrow to not make it back to the playoffs again, starting out 2 losses on the record.
I don't know if Joe Burrow has had a full training camp since his rookie year. Because remember, he goes down with that ACL injury. So second year, he's coming off the ACL. I don't know how much training camp or preseason he played in until he got back on the field. And then last year, if you remember, it was appendicitis or something crazy that had him out for a while too, that interrupted some of that time. And now this year, he's had this calf injury. Now, that calf injury does not look good. It actually looked like he aggravated it pretty badly. And the way he was, gimping around, I would be very, very worried about the health of the highest paid quarterback in NFL history with Joe Burrow, because that looks like it's going to be a lingering injury, especially now you realize you could have rested him for 2 games and been in the same exact position. I certainly wouldn't bet against them. I think when you look at these teams that have played well, yeah, Kirk Cousins, a lot of people want to blame Kirk Cousins for a lot. The man's on pace for about 6,000 passing yards this year through these first 2 games. The Chargers, offensively, they've put up 50 points, and I don't think they've turned the ball over yet. Yet they're also 0-2. And as much as I, ragged on Russell Wilson, the Denver Broncos last year, to be fair, they have a point differential of 3 points. They lost last week, to be fair, got a Hail Mary to get it in, couldn't finish the 2-point conversion to tie it. They lost by 2, and then that Raiders game, they lost by 1. So it's not like they've been getting destroyed or demolished or anything either, but definitely not the start Sean Payton wanted. But agreed, Cincinnati Bengals, I think you have to look at them and say they've done it before. They have all of that talent in a crowded AFC. And maybe I would, in the NFC, I might look at the Vikings being able to make a run. When you do look at those teams, I don't think it's going to be quite as, I don't know if you're going to need as many wins to get in the NFC as you will what looks to be a pretty top-heavy AFC.
Yeah, especially with them being on the unlucky side and being in the softer conference. You're definitely right. If Burrow doesn't rebound health-wise, then the Bengals don't have any real chance. They don't have the backup QBs to survive the AFC brutality. But the Vikings have the best scheduling path. And if just luck comes back to normal, I mean, I think are the unluckiest team in the NFL currently, then you would expect. But they got to win this week. They got to get off the schneid. They got to beat the Chargers, who are also 0-2. But they get them in Minneapolis. They get him in a good daytime slot for Kirk Cousins. So they really need to rebound well for this one.
And you got to wonder how much longer Staley's able to kind of stick it out there as the Chargers coach.
Now, what do you make of the running back? I mean, I wasn't all that. I mean, I get it. But he's like, oh, I'll get all this hate, because of the issues he had in the Thursday night game against the Eagles. But like some of that was like, okay, you're getting rando hate off the internet from anonymous accounts. Is that something worthy of a special, national trauma event or something?
It's certainly not. Mattinson, yes. Believe it or not, over the past month, I've had racial epithets hurled my way in Instagram DMs as well for my opinions on movies and on sports, right? So it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it okay that somebody receives shit like that because of fantasy football or whatever. But it is the internet. Things happen. Certainly not a good thing. I don't think we need an NFL declaration of we stand against racism. You have it in your fucking end zone. It's just wild to me.
And you get paid tons of money. Some of that's going to come with some hate. It's not never justifies the hate, but that's kind of what you're getting paid the big bucks for, is to entertain a lot of people. And there's going to be some people that are not entertained by what happens, that are going to say nasty, mean, vicious, vile things. But that paycheck kind of softens the blow. It's not like everybody's here to pat you on the back. This isn't participation trophy league.
Yeah, for sure. But the inverse of these 0-2 teams, we also got a lot of 2-0 teams. And some of these guys, let's just be real, I don't know if they're going to be able to make this entire run to the playoffs. But let's list off the 2-0 teams real quick. Dallas Cowboys, Miami Dolphins, 49ers, Ravens, Falcons, Saints, Buccaneers, Eagles, and the Commanders. Now, interestingly enough, you got 3 teams from the NFC South that are 2-0, which I'm not sure if, people really expected that heading into this season. But of all these guys, when you look at them, which one has the worst chance to make a playoff run? Personally, I look at the Falcons and I think that team's just shit. And they're kind of just hanging on by defense and a thread. They're still splitting time with Bijan Robinson. Ritter's not good. Kyle Pitts has got to be like killing himself. I need Kyle Pitts fantasy owners. The fact that he's on that team instead of maybe 31 other teams in the NFL other than the Chicago Bears. So to me, I just don't see a way that they're able to make a playoff run. I don't think it's a good team. I don't think it's a good roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think, historically, 2-0 teams, 2/3 chance they make it. I agree. Looking to the NFC is looking to the teams that are the least likely to make it to the playoffs out of this 2-0 run. It enhances your argument about the Vikings. The Packers have not looked great. The Bears have not looked great. Only the Lions, and they lost last week in OT to the Seahawks at home. So I look at these 2-0 teams, and some of them look clearly legitimate. Now, I'm not sure if the Cowboys fans are ready to book their tickets to the Vegas like they already are for the Super Bowl and planning the after parties already. That might be a little premature. You've beaten the Giants and the Jets. Let's not get too excited. But yeah, Commanders, Falcons, Bucks. Those are the 3 teams out of that list, because there'll be 3 teams out of this list typically that don't make it. Those are my 3 that I still even though he baby Baker Mayfield went out and won it in Denver last week. Credit to him for doing it. Still not totally sold on the ex-Redskins. I agree with you on the Falcons. How many smoke and mirrors can you maintain? I mean, you got the Panthers and the Packers at home. Those are your wins. Not exactly the most inspiring 2-0 start. And those games were tight late until the Falcons came away with it. In Tampa, I mean, they're who they beat. They got incredibly lucky against the Vikings. Statistically, they had no business winning that game. And they beat the Bears. I mean, the Bears are just proving not to be a quality program. I mean,
finally everyone's figuring out what I've been bitching about for 2 years with Justin Fields. The dude is not a quarterback. He's just not.
If this was like the English Premier League or Europe where you had relegation, the Bears would be the number 1 team for relegation to the lower levels of some level of football. So but yeah, I think credit to Baker Mayfield, but I think Baker Mayfield and Baby Maker Mayfield in Washington, I think those are the 2 teams I'm just not buying seeing in the final. And they got a tough enough schedule, that I think that they're not going to get all the way down there. So But yeah, those are the teams I think least likely to make the playoffs that, started 2-0 to their credit. I mean, I'll give Baker credit. 2-0 is a lot better than most people thought he would start at Tampa.
Well, I think that he's going to be better at Tampa than people think. Not because I don't think he's going to be just amazing, but he's got weapons there. He's got Mike Evans, who's going to have his 10th 1,000-yard season in a row probably. He's got Chris Godwin, but that defense is way healthier than they were last year. That defense lost some key pieces. They were not healthy and they struggled. So I think that Tampa's going to be competitive. I'm not saying stamp him in to make the playoffs or anything, but I just think that they're a better team than Atlanta for sure, and can do more than Atlanta. But let's start moving on to some of our previews for this week's game. But in order to do that, we got to talk about something that happened last week, and that's Colorado State. We talked a little bit about Colorado and the Deion factor and all of these things. But unfortunately, when you get the Deion factor, you get all this hype, you get all this talent, you get all this attention, but it also comes with some negatives. And that is the fact that every team is going to treat you like you are the biggest possible enemy. Every team is going to have your target like in their sights. And that's what I think Deion has made for himself in Colorado, when the media is constantly fawning all over you, slobbering all over Deion at every opportunity. I think it's going to piss a lot of other programs off. And you saw Colorado State come out there with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove, and they damn near beat them. It's embarrassing that Colorado, needed an double overtime win, and they stormed the field for it. But what was your take on the game we watched?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much talk because the Colorado State coach just, gave his opinion on some things, and all of a sudden that became, locker room pinup material. And the Colorado fans and Deion was like, "Oh, now we're really paying attention to the game." Well, you didn't get close to cover that 24-point spread, and you were losing most of the game. And it took a miracle 98-yard drive with less than 2 minutes left to even tie the game in a 2-point conversion, even get to OT. So they really should have probably lost that game. Now they go in as 21-point underdogs to Eugene to play Oregon, that just keeps smacking everybody around in Nix's last season there. And so, and about 81% of the bets are on Colorado. The public is totally sold from those first two games. They beat a Nebraska team that's in a first-year semi-rebuilding stage with Jeff Sims at QB. They beat a TCU team that wasn't ready out of the gate. That's it. Then they, took a mini miracle to beat a Colorado State team that got the crap kicked out of it by Washington State in week 1. So, the granted Colorado State a little bit of time to prep, and maybe they're getting back into the groove and things like that. But I think that there was probably a little, it's good for Deion. From a recruiting in the transfer portal era perspective, to get tons of public press, because that puts you in a prime position to, pun intended, to be able to get a bunch of high quality transfers next year, which is clearly his market niche that he's trying to build there. But the announcers, every other mini episode during the game was how great Deion was. Look at how he's such a father figure. Look at how he's this, and it's like, come on, let's not get too crazy. I like Deion. I think he's fun for the game. I think he hired a great offensive coordinator. But you look at like Travis Hunter. He talked a lot. What happens? Colorado State gets a chance to take a shot at him, and he's out for 3 weeks. Maybe talked a little too much, as to your point. So
that team's going to quickly become hated. Yeah, because they're all acting like Deion. And yes, it's one thing when you have a Deion on your team, or a couple Deion. When everybody's acting that way,
yes,
it can get really frustrating, especially at the college level.
Oregon, if they have the chance to run it up, is going to run it up. They ran it up on Hawaii last week when they were up by I know, because I had Hawaii plus 38. I just needed one garbage TD. I was like, come on, let off the gas. Oregon wouldn't. Imagine what they're going to do to Colorado after all the smack talked all week, with 80% of the public betting on Colorado. I wouldn't want to get in front of the Ducks in Eugene, that's for sure. But you can bet that basically everybody in this last time Pac-12, this is the last time a lot of these teams will ever get to play Deion. So I think they're going to smack him around and run up the score whenever they get the chance. And he is so thin. He relies on 4 or 5 really unique talents those guys keep getting hurt like Travis Hunter did, it could get ugly real fast again there in Boulder.
And we've seen that defense not look particularly stellar. Gave up a lot of points to TCU, gave up a lot of points and a lot of yards to Colorado State, which has not very good talent. So now you're heading to Oregon. Like you said, the public's 80% on Colorado to cover a spread, but the spread's still sitting at 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
For a team that's ranked 10th and a team that's ranked 19th, a 3 touchdown spread, that tells you a lot about how people actually feel, regardless of what the ranking is, how people actually feel about what happened during that game at Colorado State. So that's a big number to cover, though.
Yeah, the bookies are not buying Colorado at all. I mean, they got burned badly with Nebraska because 90% of the bets were on Colorado, and Colorado covered with relative ease. But they still don't believe in Colorado. And the last week just reaffirmed them, and they're begging the public to come in and bet Colorado. That line hasn't moved, even though 80% of the tickets are coming in on Colorado, which means Vegas is like, they're going to get the crap kicked out of them. They're going to lose by 30. And we want all the Colorado fans to come back and give us back that money that they took from us on the Nebraska game. So I wouldn't ride the Coach Prime this weekend, but he'll have a great chance to shock everybody like he did in opening week. And if he goes out and does it with Oregon, all the credit to him. He'll been able to back up the rhetoric. I just think this is probably when the wheels come off the hype train in Boulder.
Yeah, we'll see what happens for sure. Blue-Eyed Scorpio says the small athletic team, he didn't recruit linemen, but it was a 1-win team last year, so it's a massive improvement. It's totally a massive improvement. And it's clear that he didn't.
All the credit in the world. It's just 100%. You talk that much, and you're asking for trouble at some point. I think it's net beneficial to him, but you're right. There's a target on that roster through the rest of the season.
He's selling a lot of Blender eyewear. He's got a lot of celebrities that are out there. He's got his kids probably getting a lot of money, NIL and stuff like that. It certainly is good, and it's good for the program in general. Absolutely. But talking all that is going to have ramifications for more than just someone like Dion. It's that entire roster. And you said in the comment that he didn't recruit linemen. He must not have, because he doesn't even know his starting center's name.
Yeah.
Doesn't know his starting center's name, even when told the name, even when told the position he plays, what year he was. Deanna has no idea who it is.
Yep. It's fat, and he's got his whole theory about he wants his offensive linemen to have good families, and he wants his defensive linemen to come from bad families. And he gave us his whole premise.
To be fair, that is like a legit one. Like
it was. I was like, that analysis kind of makes sense. He wants his defensive linemen to be angry and bitter, and his offensive linemen to be steady and stable. It was a fascinating little tidbit, but I think this is when the luck runs out. But it's a big week in college football this week. Last week, Florida, Tennessee didn't have the same hype it typically does, so it was a pretty low profile week. But this week, more than substitutes for it, and some real big games that everybody's been looking forward to all year.
Yeah, and we got a Florida State team that narrowly avoided disaster last week, and I think definitely took them down a couple pegs in people's book with that Boston College game. But Florida State heading to Clemson, who obviously got off to a rough start, but Clemson is still Clemson. They still got that talent. Florida State only favored by a couple points on the road.
Yeah, Florida State almost a field goal favorite. Almost 90% of the money is on the Noles to go in and beat Clemson at Clemson. And I think people can't get out of their head, one, that Florida State's win over LSU, and then LSU crushed Mississippi State last week, but also that the Clemson lost to Duke. And the thing, and this is just this is not the same Clemson team anymore. This is not the great Tiger program, but their offense has started to click since then. They've been installing a new offensive scheme. And I thought what got exposed last week is if you look underneath the hood, Florida State's defense has actually not been very good now for several years. And they've sort of dodged it and evaded it with some smoke and mirrors. And if Boston College can put up nearly 30 points on you, the same Boston College team that pretty much got shut out by Northern Illinois in the opening week, and then almost lost to Holy Cross, who was talking smack against them at the end of the game, you might have some real defensive problems. The offense is explosive and great, and we'll see how they do against Clemson, which whatever problems Clemson has had the last 4 or 5 years has been entirely offensively. It's not, their defense has been pretty good all the way through. They had little hiccups here and there, but not much consistently. I think, a publicly disfavored home underdog that's Clemson that has more overall talent than Florida State. I wouldn't rush to take the Noles this week there in South Carolina. I think Clemson probably comes ready to play. There's some open question. The weakness of Clemson is their secondary. The strength of Florida State is their passing game. And on the flip side, how much is that offense really improved? I mean, they played such a soft schedule the last couple of weeks. We really don't know how much the problems that flashed against Duke where they couldn't score every time they got in the red zone, which was a problem last year and the year before, is a problem again. But I just don't trust that Florida State defense on the road.
It's tough to after what you saw Boston College do to them, So we'll see what Clemson does. Obviously, a big matchup. Another really big matchup that we've got is Notre Dame and Ohio State, a top 10 matchup. Number 6 Ohio State, number 9 Notre Dame. Notre Dame hasn't, I don't know how often they've played in the last 10 years, but it doesn't feel like they've come out on the winning side. So here's Notre Dame's chance. Notre Dame's still in that preseason overrated position they typically are. Is it going to end up good for them in South Bend, or are the Ohio State Buckeyes going to kind of crush their dreams?
Yeah, well, touchdown Jesus help them create a top 10 upset there in South Bend. Ohio State comes in 3-point favorites. Money's pretty evenly split because Notre Dame has impressed people early in the season, whereas Ohio State is mostly underperformed early in the season. Not quite clear how good the Ohio State passing game really is. Their receivers are top 10 receivers. They got 2 guys that are projected in the top 10 of the end of the draft, particularly Marvin Harrison Jr. But the quarterbacks is still the question mark, even though last week they finally put up a big number. That's where the real question mark is. Now, Notre Dame, Navy's not good this year. Their schedule has been the direct Michigan directional schools are really weak. This is not exactly the toughest schedule in the world that they've played.
This is a Notre Dame team, so yes.
Yeah, exactly. Out of the gate, this will be their both teams' first real challenge. The Indiana defensive performance against Ohio State will probably scare some Buckeye backers away from following the Buckeyes on the road. Talent-wise, Ohio State should cover this number and win handedly. That should be competitive, but not that competitive. So we'll see whether talent holds up or whether Ohio State missed on some key positions, particularly at quarterback. Are their quarterback is that highly touted quarterback, 5-star riddled room, not quite what was expected out of the recruiting rankings when they came in, and how much is Sam Hartman really dramatically improved? Because when he was at Wake Forest, when he stepped up in class against much higher quality defenses, he tended to struggle. So we'll see if he's able to put up he's there at Notre Dame to boost his NFL stock, because his NFL draft stock, despite his big numbers at Wake Forest, was pretty weak. So this is a big game for him personally, not as well as Notre Dame, of course, to try to break into that college playoff hunt. I mean, they would easily be in the playoff hunt next year when 12 teams get in, because they're always going to somehow find a reason to put Notre Dame in there, but not this year with it still in the top 4. So it'll be. I think it should be a good game. But if the Ohio State quarterback is as good as the recruiting rankings say, and last week is a better indicator than the 2 weeks prior, I expect the Buckeyes to roll out of South Bend with a big win.
The one thing in that quarterback matchup, Sam Hartman, with all that time, felt like he was at Wake Forest for 6 years. But with all that time, he does have big time experience, big game experience. He really does at the college level against some powerhouse teams. So we'll see if that translates in terms of that composure and that experience he's had. I think a lot of people are probably relying on that. But he has definitely looked out of this world against not great competition. Ohio State is not the same level as Eastern Tennessee Valley High School State or whoever they're playing in the first couple of weeks. But what's the next one on the docket here? Next one, we've got Alabama and Ole Miss. Alabama, after using 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks, I'm not sure how many they tried to use in that horrible looking win that they had against USF. But Alabama coming off a rough win heading to Ole Miss.
Yeah, I had South Florida catching the 34 points, so I was glad that it was as bad as it looked. I have real doubts about Tommy Rees as an offensive coordinator. I mean, he comes over from Notre Dame, and he didn't exactly look great at Notre Dame. They played the Notre Dame transfer last week, and he was awful, so they put in the 5-star true freshman. And he looked better, but not exactly great against a really bad team. It looked like the problems they had against Texas were serious problems, and it almost seemed to me that they should have gone back to Milroe, but they didn't. So I guess they've moved on from that. Now they get Ole Miss, and of course, Ole Miss is eager with Lane Kiffin. If Lane Kiffin could shove Nick Saban from the train and take over the Alabama job, he's been angling for that for years. Part of the reason he didn't take the Auburn job is he pulled himself out of it because he's hoping Nick Saban at 72 is near time to move on, and he wants the Bama job. Of course, anybody who followed the USC program might want to hesitate on rushing to get Lane Kiffin at an elite premier job. Tends to do better lower down the ranks. Alabama only favored by 7. 2/3 of the money coming in on the Rebels because people are so shocked by that Alabama game last week and questions of quarterback and their offense. Talent-wise, this game is not a 7-point game, and typically these kind of spreads, Nick Saban has beat the daylights out of people. What the great myth of last week was, Alabama off a loss, so they'll go in and crush people. If you look at Nick Saban's history, actually they don't. Coming off a loss, they tend to continue to struggle to fix whatever the problem is in the following week. But when he gets into the heart of SEC schedule and he faces an opponent that's not on the same talent plane, usually beats the living crap out of them. So I wouldn't, I think if I would lean not with the public and taking the Rebels in Tuscaloosa, I would lean with Alabama to have a bounce back game and do well. If they don't, Tommy Rees is going to be on a short leash there in Tuscaloosa.
Well, I mean, yeah, Tommy Rees left Notre Dame and Notre Dame's offense got better,
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the best, the best, endorsement for him, but they also, I just don't know if they have the personnel. I think that last week, Saban just wanted to see what the other quarterbacks had, see if there was any spark that he could have gotten. And he's basically already said, hey, Jalen's going to be the guy going forward. Jalen Milroe going to be the guy going forward. He did really well on the sidelines, letting those other guys supporting a teammate. So he's earned the opportunity to be the starter going forward. All right. I guess you don't really have anybody else. So I'm sure if he struggles, they'll try to change it. But right now, he's the guy. That's definitely a matchup people are going to be keeping their eyes on down there in Tuscaloosa. Imagine, when's the last time Saban lost 2 times in a row in Tuscaloosa? Because the USF game was in USF, right?
In 07, I don't think he lost twice in 07. He might have lost twice in his very first season there at home. I don't remember if he did, but not since then. He hasn't lost twice in Tuscaloosa in any season since then. Oof. So that's why it's like Saban against the wall. That's not a place I want to short him.
Yeah, 100%. And now for our last college game that we're going to look at, Texas, who are the ones that took down Alabama a few weeks ago, heading to Baylor.
Yeah, 15-point favorites. The public loves Texas. They think they're going to whip up on Dave Aranda's boys, despite how competitive they were against Utah, because the quarterback questions at Baylor and the fact that their defense looked bad against Texas State, though they looked a lot better against Utah, though it was Utah's backup. 15 points, a lot of points for Texas to cover on the road in that situation. And if anybody watched Texas before the Alabama game and the week after the Alabama game, they didn't look like they did against Alabama. They were unimpressive. Last week, they were unimpressive the first week. And it's not like that, Sarkisian has had great success putting up these big numbers against, in-state rivals, lost to Texas Tech on the road last year. So I wouldn't rush to the window to bet the Longhorns. I understand if this is more the line reflects doubt, I think, about Baylor than it does complete confidence in Texas, because a lot of that confidence went down with Alabama's struggles against South Florida last week. So I think combined, people are like, well, who exactly is Texas? Maybe they're a top 5 team. Maybe they're just like they were last year, kind of a top 15 team. They'll be up and down. But who is Baylor? I mean, is it the team that lost to Texas State as a huge favorite, that blew a good lead in the last 2 minutes against Utah at home? Aranda really needs a bounce back. He probably has a little bit of a leash there for another season, but this is the kind of game he needs to do well in order to keep the confidence of the alums and the donors there, because he's starting to lose it based on how things seem to be going in the wrong direction since he originally showed up there.
Yeah, this is a Baylor team that certainly had higher. They thought there's no way they anticipated being 1-2 going into this game. Matchup against Utah, okay. But what was the first loss? Like Texas State or something like that?
Texas
Yeah,
State. The Auburn
Texas
transfer
State.
torched them.
Texas State, and then, a win against Long Island. Congratulations. But certainly they need to turn things around there. All right, let's head to the NFL. We got some interesting games going on in the NFL. We'll start with the Giants, who narrowly avoided being one of those 0-2 teams. They have played 6 quarters of atrocious football and were able to come back in the second half to beat the Cardinals. But they are headed to a team that is maybe the best that they've faced yet, including the Dallas Cowboys, and that's the 49ers.
Yeah, public is pouring money in on the 49ers. Even though they're 10-point favorites, that line is probably going to go up. 3/4 of the bets are at San Francisco at home. They don't think New York they don't think the New York football Giants are going to cross the country and do well there in the Bay. 49ers are one of those 2-0 teams, coming off a pretty impressive, solid win against the Rams, though they didn't cover the number in most places. But 10 points is kind of big, double digits in the NFL, but the 49ers in this situation have had a history of covering it under Kyle Shanahan. So I wouldn't rush to the window to back a public favorite of that scale. But it does suggest that the gamblers and the bookies don't really have much trust in the Giants after seeing those 6 bad quarters of football.
And with the knowledge that Saquon does not look like he'll be part of this team for a couple weeks, with that injury sustained.
And it goes back to that running back problem.
Exactly. There's a reason the GMs don't want to pay. There's a reason GMs are willing to pay out a lot of money for a lot of different positions. There's a reason they don't want to do it for running backs. And but Saquon is the most important part of that running game, undeniably, or of that offense, undeniably. That's when they started to get things going in that second half, was when they started focusing on him. Well, he probably is not going to be part of that offense for a few weeks. But that's a tough task for anybody to go into San Francisco, but especially the struggling Giants team. There's no doubt about that. Now, the Broncos, we've talked about 0-2 and 2-0 teams. Here's an 0-2 team facing a 2-0 team. The Denver Broncos, who have narrowly lost both their games, headed to Miami to play maybe potentially the favorite for MVP in Tua and that offense.
Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, the Dolphins are almost a touchdown favorite at home there in Miami. Almost 85% of the bets, this is one of the most lopsided games so far of the week, are on Miami. And I get it. Miami went in and beat the Chargers on the road, went in and beat the Pats up, and the Pats were up. Belichick was up against it on the road. And so there's a lot of excitement. Waddle bounced back from that hit he took last week. Tyreek Hill continues to put up the big numbers. The running game is starting to now get going because of how good the passing game has been with Tua, a guy who just 2 years ago, people were wondering whether he could make it as an NFL quarterback. And now, as you note, he's getting the MVP hype. This is really, Sean Payton really needs a win here. He really can't afford 0-3. He's going up against a team that's now getting almost as much hype as any other team in the entire league to win the Super Bowl. It's a time to show off that he's still Sean Payton. If he's going to do it, this is the time to do it. I wouldn't be surprised at the Broncos pulling a win, but if Sean Payton is going to pull it off with Russell Wilson, we'll see it this week, in my opinion. We'll see how well they do. Again, that Dolphins defense didn't do a lot against the Chargers. They did just enough to survive against the Pats. Though there wasn't a lot of home cooking in that last official rule yet. I thought that offensive lineman got past the first line mark.
I thought he was short, but I was surprised they overturned it.
Especially there in New England.
Watching it live, I was like, that looks short to me. And then on the replay, I'm like, definitely looks short. But I've definitely seen them let things stand that looked closer than that. You know what I mean? So yeah. I was just surprised.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think it's a lopsided game. I think this is how much confidence you have that Sean Payton can continue to sort of reclaim Russell Wilson. This is I think this could be one of the most exciting, interesting games of the week. If we see the Russell Wilson, Sean Payton combination take off, this is the week to see it. And Tua has shown no limit so far in what that offense can do in the new scheme. So I think it will be probably the most fun game of the week.
I mean, we hear the word offensive genius, all this stuff thrown out there whenever you get any new young coach, whether it's Whether it's over at the Rams with Sean McVay, whether it's Zach Taylor with Cincinnati, and of course, when Mike McDaniel went to Miami. But what he's able to do week in, week out to come up with schemes to get these guys open for Tua is pretty impressive. It's like now Tua's thrown some great balls. Don't get me wrong. He's thrown some great balls. Threw an incredible pass to Jalen Waddle one-on-one outside on the left on the sideline last week when they really needed it. But a lot of these big Tua these big Tyreek Hill plays, the fastest man in the league is running with nobody around him somehow, but it's because of the way that he's scheming, and it's just remarkable. Raheem Mostert's been big for them. That's a guy who I've always felt if he got the opportunity and got the carries could really be a guy. Of course, he's a Purdue Boilermaker, so I love him. But wherever he's gone, it seems like whether it's been an injury or just too much running back depth or whatever, he's really never had that opportunity. Looks like he's getting it now and is definitely making the most out of it. So that Miami offense, it's tough to bet against them in any game that's not double digits. That's for sure. Now we've got the Steelers coming off a win. One of the sloppiest games I've ever fucking seen, to be honest with you. The way that the first quarter lasted 2 hours because it was pick six and then fumble and then interception, then review because of this fumble, and then a fumble that turns into another fumble that they had to review. It was wild to me. But eventually the first quarter ended. The Steelers survived. Nick Chubb, unfortunately, did not. And now the Steelers are heading to Vegas. This is the first home game the Raiders, I think they have, because I think they were on the road the first 2 weeks.
It is, and it's this will be Jimmy G's opening game, in a rivalry that is old and historic, going back to the miraculous catch many years ago that John Madden still won't talk about without getting enraged because it was illegal. It was illegal touching, as he'll explain to everybody. Then when Franco Harris's famous catch in the AFC playoffs. So it's a great old rivalry. I mean, the Raiders only favored by less than a field goal, 2.5. Most of the money so far is coming on the Steelers. People are pumped about that performance last night. As you note, it wasn't exactly an impressive offensive performance. We've had now 2 games in which the Steelers at home have not looked very good. Now, the Raiders are coming off catching the Bills in a bad spot for the Raiders, where the Bills just took out all of their anger from the Jets game on the Raiders and ran up the total to a 38-10 or thereabout final. But you look beneath the hood, it was much closer than that statistically. It was just one of those games that gets out of hand in the scoring column in ways that isn't quite reflective of what's happening on a play-to-play, down-to-down basis. So I would probably lean a little bit towards the Raiders. I'm not buying the Kenny Pickett era in Pittsburgh just yet.
Yeah, it did not look great. You got people calling for them to fire their offensive coordinator. And, we'll see. We have had 2, I think, concussion scares for the big weapons for the Raiders the past 2 weeks in their wide receivers, but both of them look to be good. And I think Adams has already cleared concussion protocol, so he should be fine as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens out there in Vegas. Now, we do have an Eagles team who they let the Vikings continue to hang around and let Kirk Cousins get within 6 points of them, before that game was over. But we do have the Eagles heading to Tampa to play Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers.
Yeah, Eagles favored in that, another Monday night back-to-back matchups. The Eagles favored by 5 on the road, 3/4 of the bets coming on the Eagles. So what's interesting is despite how, they really didn't look great against New England, really didn't look great against Minnesota, are considered the luckiest team in the league by a lot of stats so far this season. Arguably outplayed statistically by a touchdown or more in both of those games, New England and Minnesota. Yet here they are going up against another 2-0 Tampa Bay team, playing Tampa on the road on a Monday night game, almost up to 6 points. It looks like that's where the line is heading if it keeps going in that direction. I kind of get the spread just because there's a legitimate doubts about how good Tampa is with Baker Mayfield at QB. And there's still belief that the Eagles will turn it on like they did last season. I'm not quite sold. I mean, they lost both of their coordinators. They have just not – their secondary hasn't looked anywhere near. Now, they may have some guys back this week, but they haven't looked – I mean, Cousins torched them, just torched them pretty much all game. I mean, but for 4 fumbles, they lose that game at home to Minnesota. And they got lucky with the fumble in New England to win that game. It's like, I mean, can you bank on 2 more lost fumbles to help you carry the weight? So I'm not
Yeah.
eager to lay the 5 or 6 with the Eagles on the road at Tampa on Monday night. Not super eager to bet on Baker Mayfield either. So we'll see what we'll ultimately get to the window with. But the public loves the Eagles, but usually that's not a good place to bet on Monday night.
These damn double Monday night games, it used to be we got one, right? It used to be we got one in the beginning of the season. One would start at like 5 or 6, the other would start at like 9. They wouldn't really overlap. Now they got these things overlapping. It's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. But that's ESPN's strategy, I guess. So that is the first one, Eagles, Buccaneers. The second one is also very interesting. Rams, who have looked, I think, better than anyone expected them to look right out of the gate, the way Stafford looked last year, injury-ridden season, and the fact without Cooper Kupp, but they have found replacements for Cooper Kupp in that offense. It's looking great. And they're headed to Cincinnati to play a desperate Bengals squad with a banged-up Joe Burrow. And I think everybody, if you're interested in betting, was probably thanking Sean McVay for his decision to kick a field goal as time expired to pointlessly cover the spread for them in that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rams are only catching a point and a half. Traveling. I mean, there's a matchup of the Super Bowl from a couple of years ago. And so I think, as you note, the Bengals really got to win this game. Rams are feeling pretty good. They're 1-1. They hung in there with the 49ers in a close, tight game. Now they're traveling crisscross the country. The big question is how healthy Burrow is. If that's what Billy Walters, that's the book behind me, the famous legendary sports betting gambler, said the favorite piece of information he always wants to know is how bad is the quarterback hurt? Pointing out that they really often keep a lot of that intel and information hidden, that there's a big range of quarterback injuries. That's the big question I have about Burrow. Exactly how, if Burrow is close to 80% or better, I think this is a little bit of a small margin for a must-win game for the Bengals with a Rams team that defensively still hasn't shown a lot. I mean, the 49ers did pretty much what they wanted against them last week. They did well against Seattle. Well, I should say well for a half against Seattle. But that's kind of about it. And Seattle's the kind of offense that can just stall on its own for a half. It stalled for the first half against Detroit. I know because I had Seattle first half. They managed not to cover that line and then win the game as being underdog. But that's the MO of Geno Smith in that offensive schema. They're more implosive than explosive at times. But if Burrow's healthy, this number's probably a little small. But what the number says is that the bookies have doubts about Burrow's health. 60% of the money coming in on the Rams.
And you have to at this point. And also, it's a pretty low total as well. Where you would imagine that this game between two offenses who have put up decent numbers. Now, Stafford's touchdown numbers aren't there, but the team in and of itself has been producing points against the Bengals high-flying offense, or what we thought would be a high-flying offense. You would have been shocked to see the total sitting right now at around 43 and a half. But that's what it is. So it does tell you a lot about what people think the state of the Bengals is right now. But this is as close as you can get to a must-win game in Game 3. It's kind of a must-win for Cincinnati, especially to calm that fan base down a little bit. But there you go. That's that game. That does it for our NFL and college football. We go over 5 of what we think is the most interesting games of the week, interesting matchups from a betting perspective. But then Robert, of course, always gives out some interesting plays at the end here.
Yeah, the free bet, the free pick. Last year they made money. So far, we're 2-0 on the year. Free pick for this week is Clemson plus 2.5 at home against Florida State. I think the Tigers show up in this big matchup at home, and they really need to show that they are still the big dog in the ACC. And Survivor pick of the week, which we're also 2-0 on. Mine this week is if there's any time to play the 49ers at home against the Giants is a good time to play the 49ers. So my Survivor pick of the week is the San Francisco 49ers.
There you go. Well, the free picks have paid off so far. This is the second week in a row. I think you gave out a pick related to Florida State not covering, which you can tell where we're headed there. But we do appreciate you guys being here. I know it's not the normal date, which sucks. But we should be back to normal next week, back on Wednesday night. Appreciate you guys showing up, especially because we got counter programming as well going on at Geeks and Gamers on Tuesday nights. But Robert, one more time, where can people find you and all the Sports Picks crew if they're looking for more insight, picks, or just discussion about sports betting?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can join the board and get lots of free picks from Cricket, Game On, Cody, Major Wedgie, a bunch of people that put out free picks. Or you can become a subscriber, and what you get as a subscriber is you get over 200 picks a month during football season, less than a quarter per pick, the most affordable handicapping service out there anywhere, and the same handicapping service that's made money in every sport and has made money across every season in the last 2 years that we've been operating, and won every single 5% play in every major sporting event last year. It's a place where we help put the odds in your favor at sportspicks.locals.com.
There it is. Link is in the description. Appreciate Robert Barnes for joining us, and we'll see you next week, 8 days from now at this same time. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you later.